The job ad was almost certainly a typo, or a scam. Seasonal lookout. Acres drop, WA. $4,500 per week. 6-week contract. Immediate start. Experience preferred, not required. I had no experience, unless you count spending 3 years staring out of a different kind of box, my 14th floor apartment, watching the city grind itself to a halt. I'd been laid off from a software job that I'm pretty sure a script could do now. I was broke, bored, and my lease was up. I applied, expecting nothing. They called me 2 hours later. The woman on the phone, Sarah, sounded rushed. Alex, great. Your resume looks fine. The position is at the Aerie Tower, overlooking the Stillwater National Forest. It's isolated. You'll be solo for the full 6 weeks. Supplies are trucked in. Can you handle isolation, Alex? Yes. I think so. Good. The pay is correct. It's a hazard contract through a private insurer, something about the tower's remote access. Standard. Nothing about $4,500 a week is standard. You'll drive to the town of Acres Drop. Meet our local contact, Dale. He'll get you set up. A 4x4 is required for the access road. We can provide one if I have a truck, I interrupted, looking at my beat-up Tacoma in the parking lot. Perfect. The contract is digital. Sign it, and you can start tomorrow. Dale's expecting you. The line clicked before I could ask what hazard contract meant. The document arrived in my email a second later. It was 50 pages of dense legalese, but the part that mattered was the dollar amount and the waiver. I was signing away my right to sue for environmental, atmospheric, and geographic anomalies. I figured it meant, don't sue us if a bear eats you or you fall off the mountain. I signed it. The drive took 7 hours. The last 2 were spent navigating a winding, single-lane road that dropped into a valley so deep it felt like the landscape was trying to swallow me. Acres Drop wasn't so much a town as a huddle of buildings bracing against the wilderness. It was nestled in a perfect bowl of basalt cliffs, and the air was unnervingly still. I met Dale at the general store, which seemed to sell more rope and sandbags than it did food. Dale was a short, barrel-chested man in his 50s with eyes that never quite met mine. He was wearing heavy-duty logging boots, which seemed normal, until I noticed the soles. They were thick, customized steel plates, like a deep-sea diver's. Alex, he grunted, not offering a hand. You're late. Sorry. The road in, yeah? The drop keeps its own time. He threw a heavy canvas duffel bag into the bed of my truck. It landed with a metallic thud. Your gear. Don't open it till you're up top. He led me to the access road, a gravel track that looked more like a riverbed. So, what's the hazard? I asked, trying to make conversation as we stood by my truck. Bears? Mountain lions? Dale stopped, finally looking at me. His eyes were pale, washed-out blue. Gravity, he said. I waited for the punchline. It didn't come. It's a local joke, he continued, his face betraying nothing. The air's thin. People get lightheaded. Fall off things. Hence the name. Acres Drop. Right. Lightheaded. Yeah. He tapped my truck tire with his steel-plated boot. Keep your truck heavy. Keep yourself heavier. The area is state-of-the-art, but she's sensitive. Sensitive to what? The wind. It gets windy. He handed me a key. Radio in every morning at 0800, every night at 2000. No exceptions. If you miss a check-in, we don't come looking. We just stop the pay. You get me? You don't come looking? It's in the contract, son. You miss a call, you've broken assignment. We assume you've walked off. He got in his own truck, which looked like it had been retrofitted with roll bars on the inside, and drove away, leaving me at the base of the mountain. The Aerie was an impressive, terrifying piece of engineering. It was a sleek, modern glass and steel cylinder perched on a 100-foot concrete pillar. The only way up was a claustrophobic ladder inside the pillar, leading to a trapdoor in the floor. The living space was a 360-degree viewing platform. Stove, high-tech radio console, a small cot, a toilet, and glass. Nothing but glass from my waist to the ceiling. I felt like a bug in a jar. I opened the duffel bag Dale had given me. Inside, there wasn't hiking gear. It was a weighted safety harness, like for rock climbing, but lined with what looked like lead. And 3 sets of heavy magnetic ankle weights. Keep yourself heavier, he'd said. I put the gear aside, unnerved. The first 3 days were fine. Boring, even. The view was staggering. I saw smoke plumes 50 miles out and radioed them in. I read, I cooked, I watched the eagles circling below me. The silence was absolute. The only hazard was the stillness. It wasn't natural. No wind. No rustling leaves. Even the birds seemed to glide in silence. On the 4th night, I was making coffee. The water in the kettle was taking forever to boil. I was staring at it, watching the surface, when I noticed the steam. It wasn't rising. The steam left the spout, hung in the air in a perfect, coiling cloud, and then just stayed there. It didn't dissipate. It didn't go up. It just floated, a few inches from the kettle, maintaining its shape. I waved my hand through it. The cloud broke apart, but the wisps didn't scatter. They just drifted lazily toward the floor. Slowly. Far too slowly. I told myself it was the altitude. Air pressure. Something. I went to bed, clipping the mandatory harness to a heavy-duty carabiner bolted to the concrete floor next to my cot. It felt ridiculous. I woke up at 3:14 a.m. I knew the time because my phone was floating in front of my face. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My throat locked. My phone, my water bottle, the book I'd been reading, my boots, they were all just hovering. Suspended in the air of the cabin. They weren't rising or falling. They were just stuck, as if the off switch for gravity had been flipped. I was still anchored to the cot by the heavy harness. I could feel it, pulling taut. Not against the floor. It was pulling taut against me. I looked at my arm. It was hovering an inch above the blanket. I wasn't being held down by the harness. The harness was the only thing keeping me from floating up to the ceiling. Then I heard it. A sound from outside. It wasn't wind. It was a low, resonant groan. It wasn't coming from below, or from the side. It was coming from above. I looked up, through the ceiling to floor glass. The stars were gone, blotted out by a shape. It was the peak of the mountain next to the tower. A massive, 10,000-ton chunk of rock, granite, and pine trees. It had separated from the cliff face. And it was floating, silently, 100 yards above my head, blocking out the sky. It wasn't falling. It was just there. My mind couldn't process the scale. I was staring at a floating island of granite, big enough to crush this tower like a soda can. It was just hanging there. Silent. I could see the dark, jagged wounds on the mountainside where it had torn free. Soil and small rocks drifted away from it in a slow-motion cloud, not falling, just separating. A bead of sweat broke free from my hairline. It didn't roll down my face. It detached, shimmering, and hovered an inch from my eyebrow. I choked back a surge of bile. I was floating too. The heavy harness was the only reason I was still near the floor. I could feel my limbs trying to drift upwards. I was a helium balloon, and the harness was the small child holding the string. If that carabiner failed, I would drift up, slam into the ceiling, and stay there until what? The until was the real terror. What happens when the off switch is flipped back on? My eyes shot back to the floating mountain. If that rock, that continent of a rock, was still up there when gravity returned, the impact would liquidate this entire valley. I tried to move. It was a mistake. I pushed off my cot, intending to stand. Instead, the small movement sent me spinning slowly in the zero-G of the cabin. The harness line went taut, yanking me back with a brutal snap that rattled my teeth. I slammed back onto the cot, the wind knocked out of me. My floating phone drifted by my ear, mocking me. I was trapped. I couldn't walk, I couldn't crawl. The only way to move was to pull myself, hand over hand, on the furniture, which was all bolted to the floor. Bolted to the floor. Keep yourself heavier. The steel-plated boots. It all clicked. This wasn't an anomaly. This was the job. I looked at the gear Dale had given me. The magnetic ankle weights. I reached for them, my arm drifting up past my target. I had to focus, to swim through the air, grabbing the leg of the cot to anchor myself. I pulled one of the weights toward me. It was heavy, maybe 10 pounds. But in this state, it had no weight. It just had mass. I heard a sound. A high-pitched, metallic ping. It was the tower. The concrete pillar beneath me was stretching. The metal frame of the observation deck was groaning. It was being pulled upward. The entire Aerie was trying to join the floating mountain. And then, a new noise. A deep, resonant thrum, like a cosmic bass string being plucked. It was coming from everywhere. I looked at the floating drops of sweat by my face point. One of them vibrated, and then it fell. It streaked past my eye and hit the floor with a tiny tick. The thrumming intensified. The cabin light flickered. My stomach dropped before the rest of me did. Whump. The sensation was agonizing. It wasn't just falling. It was being driven into the cot. 1,000 pounds of sudden, crushing weight. My bones ached. The harness straps bit into my shoulders, the buckle digging into my gut. Outside, a sound like the world tearing in half. A deafening, grinding crack. The floating objects, my phone, my boots, the book, the hovering cloud of steam, all slammed into the floor in a single, violent instant. My phone screen shattered. The kettle crashed onto its side. I yelled, a soundless gasp, as my lungs fought against the sudden pressure, and then, as fast as it came, it was over. Silence. Absolute, ringing silence. I was breathing in ragged gasps. I was heavy. I felt like I weighed 500 pounds. My limbs were lead. I managed to unclip the harness, my fingers shaking. I rolled off the cot and my knees buckled, the force of my own weight surprising me. I crawled to the window, my eyes searching the sky. The mountain was gone. No. I looked again, my heart pounding. It wasn't gone. It was back. The floating island was perfectly slotted back into the cliff face it had torn free from. There was no seam. No debris. It was as if it had never, ever moved. I stared, refusing to believe it. Had I dreamed it? Had the altitude finally gotten to me? My shattered phone on the floor told me no. The puddle of water from the overturned kettle told me no. I forced myself to the radio console. I had to report this. I had to tell Dale, tell Sarah. Something. I reached for the radio handset, but my hand froze. The console screen, which had been dark, was now lit. It wasn't a radio. Not just a radio. It was a data logger. A single line of text was blinking on the screen. Local event 09A, gravitational flux. Duration, 14 minutes and 21 seconds. Max apex, 2 centimos. Min apex, 1.88 g. System stable. I stared at the words. Local event 09A. The A implied there was a B. The 09 implied 8 had come before it. I clicked on the log icon. A list populated the screen. Event 08B, 14 hours ago. While I was driving. Event 08A, 29 hours ago. While I was meeting Dale. Event 07C, 40 hours ago. While I was asleep at home. They weren't paying me $4,500 a week to watch for fires. They were paying me to be a human seismograph in a place where the rules of physics were just a suggestion. Then I saw a new icon flashing on the screen. It was red. It wasn't a log. It was an alert. It wasn't there before the event. It was a small proximity sensor. It was labeled Silo 4. A new reading appeared next to it. Silo 4, hatch secure. Internal atmosphere unknown. I looked around the glass cabin. There were no silos. There was nothing but the tower, the rocks, and the trees. I looked down, through the glass floor panel at my feet, past the 100-foot pillar. There, just visible, carved into the solid rock of the mountain 50 yards from the base of my tower, was a perfect, 30-foot wide circle of flat, seamless steel. It was a hatch, and I wasn't just here to watch the trees. I was here to watch it. The silence in the Aerie was worse than the event itself. It was a dense, ringing vacuum, broken only by the tick-tick-tick of a cooling-down stove and the insistent, silent pulse of the red light on the console. Silo 4, hatch secure. Internal atmosphere unknown. I was on my hands and knees, my forehead pressed against the cool glass of the floor panel. I was breathing like I just run a marathon. The 1.88 G spike had left my muscles feeling like bruised, waterlogged meat. I have to get out of here. The thought was pure, primal panic. I could be halfway down the access road before Dale even knew I was gone. But the words on the console held me captive. Local event 09A. This was routine. This was expected. The job wasn't a scam. It was a trap. They weren't paying me $4,500 a week to watch for fires. They were paying me to be the lab rat that confirms the maze is still working. And what about Silo 4? I grabbed the heavy, tower-mounted binoculars from their stand. My hands were shaking so badly it took a moment to focus. I aimed them down, at the 30-foot steel circle I'd never noticed before. It wasn't like a missile silo cover. It wasn't military green, pockmarked with rivets. It was a single, seamless disc of metal that looked more like polished obsidian. It had no handles, no hinges, no visible opening. It was perfectly flush with the granite, as if it had been poured into the rock like water and then hardened. The red light on the console pulsed in time with my heartbeat. Internal atmosphere, unknown. What did that mean? What was it before? My fingers, slick with sweat, fumbled with the console's trackpad. I navigated away from the alert, into the system logs. I found the silo's submenu. It had its own event log, just like the Gravity one. The log history was boring. For weeks, months, maybe years, it was the same entry, over and over, every 6 hours. Log, silo_4_atmos, stable. N2/O2/ARMIX. Pressure, 101.3 kilopascals. Log, silo_4_atmos, stable. N2/O2/ARMIX. Pressure, 101.3 kilopascals. Then I saw the new entries. Log 3:14 and 20 seconds AM. Event 09A detected. Initiating Flux protocol. Log 3:14 and 21 seconds AM. Atmos purged. Venting complete. Log 3:28 and 42 seconds AM. Event 09A concluded. Flux protocol complete. Log 3:28 and 43 seconds AM. Current status, hatch secure. Internal atmosphere unknown. My blood ran cold. Purge. The gravity event wasn't an anomaly. It was a byproduct. It was the Flux protocol. It was the exhaust from whatever this was. They had vented the silo. They had emptied it of its stable atmosphere and in the process had nearly ripped the mountain apart. Why? To clear it out for something new? Or to let something out? A sharp beat from the console made me jump so hard I nearly screamed. It was the clock. 07:59 am. Check-in. I had 60 seconds to decide. Do I tell him? Do I yell for help? Dale, the mountain floated and the secret bunker under my tower just vented its atmosphere. He'd call me crazy. He'd say I was hypoxic from the altitude. He would, exactly what he was paid to do. You miss a check-in, we assume you've walked off. They weren't worried I'd die. They were worried I'd quit. The check-in wasn't a safety measure. It was a compliance test. The radio speaker hissed to life, right at 0800:00. Aerie, this is base. You on, son? Dale's voice. As flat and emotionless as the granite outside. I looked at the shattered screen of my phone on the floor. I looked at the red blinking light of the silo. I looked at the mountain that had moved. I picked up the handset. My voice was a dry, cracking rasp. This is Aerie. I managed. I cleared my throat, forcing the tremor out. This is Aerie. All clear on the ridge. No smoke. I paused. Quiet night. A pause on the other end. It stretched. 1 second. 2. 5. I could hear him breathing. Good, Dale said finally. The single word was clipped. We logged some atmospheric disturbance up your way around 0300. High winds. Sounded nasty. My knuckles turned white on the handset. He knew. He wasn't asking me if I was okay. He was telling me the story. The official version of events. Yeah, I said, my voice hollow. It was just the wind. Shook the tower a bit, but she's solid. Another pause. Good. That's what we like to hear. Keep your boots heavy, Aerie. Base out. The line clicked out. I stood in the total silence for a full minute, the dead handset in my hand. I had passed. I had lied. I had proven I was sane enough to pretend the impossible hadn't happened. I was a good little lab rat. I hung the handset up, a new, cold feeling of complicity settling in my gut. I was part of it now. I turned back to the console, to the blinking red light. My job was to watch the silo, but the screen had changed. The radio call had taken less than a minute. In that minute, a new line of text had appeared under the alert. Silo 4, hatch secure. Internal atmosphere unknown. Alert, external fastener disengaged. Alert, external fastener B disengaged. Alert, external fastener C disengaged. Something inside the silo was unlocking the door from the outside. But I was the only one out here. Then I saw it. A new icon on the screen. A camera feed. It was labeled silo_4_ext_cm. A camera I hadn't known existed. My finger, trembling, clicked the icon. The screen flickered, resolving into a grainy, night vision image. It was a camera aimed at the hatch, and there were figures on it. They weren't people. They were standing by the edge of the seamless steel circle. 3 of them. They were tall, impossibly thin, and wearing what looked like heavy, pressurized diving suits. like the ones from old-fashioned deep-sea exploration. The kind with the big, round copper helmets. Except the helmets weren't copper. They were dark, reflective glass. And I couldn't see a single light, or face, inside any of them. One of them turned, its helmet faceless and black, and looked directly at the camera. Directly at me. A new line of text appeared on my screen. Proximity alert. Local entity detected. Initiating greeting protocol. My breath fogged the glass. I was staring at the monitor, then at the binoculars, then back at the monitor. My mind was trying to build a bridge between the two images. On the grainy night vision feed, the three figures were stark and menacing. Faceless observers. I grabbed the binoculars and focused them on the hatch, 100 feet below and 50 yards away. My hands were shaking so hard the image vibrated. They were real. They were undeniably, physically there, standing on the black steel circle. I could see them with my own eyes. The diving suits weren't old canvas and copper. They were made of a smooth, gray, almost organic-looking material that seemed to drink the moonlight. There were no seams, no zippers. The helmets were a perfect, reflective black. I could see the reflection of my own tower, a tiny glass needle, warped on the curve of their faces. They were working. The console message hadn't been an alert, it had been a status update. They were disengaging the fasteners. Proximity alert. Local entity detected. Initiating greeting protocol. I stared at the text. I was the local entity. The tower, my presence, I was the variable. A sharp click echoed from outside the tower. Not from below, but from somewhere on the Aerie's chassis. A speaker. A voice crackled to life, amplified, booming across the silent valley. It wasn't Dale. It was a synthesized, perfectly neutral, female voice. It sounded like a GPS giving directions to a black hole. Greeting. ERITOWERLOKOUTSTATION3. We confirm. Observation protocol is active. Local entity Alex M. is on site. Event 09A is concluded. Silo 4 is purged. You may proceed. My name. It said my name. My blood didn't just run cold, it evaporated. They knew my name. It was in the system. I wasn't an employee. I was a line item. Local entity Alex M. I watched through the binoculars, my muscles locked in terror. The three figures on the hatch had stopped working. Their heads, the identical black orbs, swiveled in unison. They were looking up. Directly at my window. Directly at me. They stood like that for 5, 10, 15 seconds. Just staring. And then the one in the middle, the one that had looked at the camera feed, raised its hand. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a wave. It was a slow, deliberate acknowledgement. A soldier saluting a superior. Or a zookeeper acknowledging the gorilla in the cage. We see you. We know you are there. We are proceeding. It lowered its arm. The three of them turned, as one, back to the hatch. They weren't opening it. I watched, mesmerized by the horror. The fasteners were slots, invisible to me, but the figures produced tools. They weren't wrenches. They were slender rods of light, a cold ozone blue. They plunged these rods into the seam between the hatch and the granite. The console updated. Alert, external fastener D disengaged. Alert, external fastener E disengaged. They weren't locking it. They were unlocking it. A new sound started. A low-frequency vibration that I felt more in my teeth than in my ears. It was the sound of colossal machinery engaging deep within the mountain. The silo. The 30-foot steel disc. It began to turn. It rotated, counterclockwise, with agonizing slowness. A quarter-inch at a time. It was scraping against the granite with a sound like a giant dragging its nails across the earth's core. Grind. grind. The sound was physical. It shook the tower. The coffee mug I'd righted slid off the counter and shattered on the floor. The internal atmosphere was unknown, because the silo had been purged. It was an airlock. They had just emptied it, and now they were opening the inner door. The three figures didn't move. They just stood on the turning disc, patient, as it rotated. They were the key holders. The attendants. I thought back to Dale's steel-plated boots. Keep yourself heavier. I looked at the diving suits the figures wore. They were heavy, I realized. Weighted. Designed for an environment where gravity was optional. They were gravity suits. The grinding stopped. The console updated again. Silo 4, hatch unlocked. Awaiting cycling. Internal pressure, 0 kilopascals. External pressure, 81.2 kilopascals. The inside was a vacuum. The three figures stepped off the disc, back onto the solid rock. They lined up, side by side, facing the hatch. Like an honor guard, and then, a new alert flashed. A single, terrifying word, cycling. A hiss. A sound so loud it was almost silent. A pressure wave that pushed against the tower glass. It was the sound of an entire atmosphere being instantly vented into the silo.no. Not vented in. Sucked out. I looked at the pressure reading. External pressure, 81.1 kilopascals. External pressure, 81.0 kilopascals. External pressure, 80.9 kilopascals. It was eating the air. The silo was a vacuum chamber, and it had just opened its maw to the valley. The unknown atmosphere wasn't in the silo. The silo was the unknown. It was a place where atmosphere didn't exist. The three figures stood perfectly still, unaffected by the rushing wind, their heavy suits anchoring them to the rock. A new line of text appeared. Internal atmosphere, stable. Stasis protocol initiated. The hatch, no longer grinding, began to rise. The hatch didn't swing open on a hinge. It rose. It was a solid, 30-foot wide, 10-foot thick plug of dark steel, lifting perfectly, silently, from the bedrock. It was an elevator, a platform. The console updated. Silo 4 hatch open. Internal environment stable. Stasis protocol initiated. My eyes were glued to the binoculars, my knuckles white. The three faceless figures in their heavy gravity suits stood at rigid attention by the edge of the new, perfectly circular abyss. The stasis protocol wasn't a sound. It was a light. A beam of cohesive, ice blue light, no thicker than a pencil, shot up from the center of the black pit. It went up, and then stopped, precisely 100 feet in the air, level with my Aerie. It just terminated, in midair, forming a perfect, flat, horizontal plane of light that began to spin, slowly. Like a spectral ceiling. A moment later, the platform began to rise from the silo. It was a smaller, 10-foot square in the center of the whole. It ascended without a sound. My first thought was, cargo. They were bringing up cargo, but there was nothing on it. Just a few items, piled neatly in the center. It looked familiar. My stomach hollowed out. It was a canvas duffel bag. A weighted harness. A set of magnetic ankle weights. It was the exact same set of gear Dale had given me. The platform stopped, flush with the granite. The three figures stepped forward in unison. One of them picked up the bag. The other two methodically folded the harness. They worked with a sterile, practiced efficiency. Warehouse workers. They stepped off the platform, carrying the gear. They walked to a small, almost invisible panel in the rock wall, 20 feet away. The panel slid open, revealing a dark chute. They deposited the gear, piece by piece, into the darkness. The panel slid shut, The reclamation, or whatever this was complete. The three figures returned to the edge of the pit. They stood, side by side, and they waited. What are you waiting for? I whispered, my voice a dry rasp in the silent cabin. The console answered me. A new line of text, a different color. Not a log. Not an alert. It was a receipt. Contract, Thomas R. Failed. Duration, 4 days. Assets, reclaimed. Penalty, full. Disposition, pending. Thomas R. The previous lookout. The experience preferred. He hadn't quit. He hadn't walked off. He had failed. Failed what? The lie? The check-in? Had he panicked? Had he seen the floating mountain and tried to call 911? Disposition pending. My blood felt like sludge. I was suddenly, agonizingly aware of the 100-foot drop beneath me. The 50-page waiver. We don't come looking. We just stop the pay. I looked at the console, at my own name. Contract, Alex M. Active. Duration, 4 days. Status, observing. Event 09A logged. I had passed. I had lied. I had done what Thomas R. could not. I had observed. A cold, sickening relief washed over me, immediately followed by a wave of profound guilt. I was still here. He was pending. But the scene wasn't over. The three figures were still waiting. The platform, which had remained level with the ground, suddenly dropped. It fell back into the abyss, fast and silent. The massive, 30-foot steel plug began its descent, lowering back into the mountain. The spinning disk of blue stasis light stayed, hovering in the air. The hatch slammed shut. A puff of dust and pressurized air. Silo 4, hatch secure. The three figures turned. They walked, in single file, away from the hatch, toward the sheer basalt cliff face at the edge of the valley. They didn't use a path. They just walked. They reached the cliff. And they kept walking. I watched, disbelieving, as the first one stepped onto the vertical rock wall. Its heavy boot stuck. It lifted its other foot. And it began to walk straight up the cliff, perpendicular to the ground, as easily as I would walk on a sidewalk. The other two followed. They were walking up the cliff face, their heavy gravity suits. No, their gravity boots, holding them fast. They were spiders. They were walking out of the valley, and out of sight. The Aerie was silent again. The silo was closed. The figures were gone. It was over. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I felt sick, but I was alive. I was the one who made it. The spinning blue, stasis, light, however, was still there. Hovering, stasis protocol, active. Local entity Alex M. Confirmed. Initiating Phase 2. Phase 2? I said aloud. The blue light changed. The spinning disk tilted. It was no longer a ceiling. It was a searchlight, and it was pointing directly at my tower. Directly at me. A new sound. Not from the silo. Not from the speakers. A sound from inside the tower with me. A heavy, metallic clack. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. I looked down at the floor. At the trapdoor. The only way in or out. The heavy steel bolt, the one on my side, the one I had locked myself. It was sliding open. The sound was unmistakable. The thick, oiled chink of heavy steel sliding against steel. The bolt on the trapdoor. My bolt. I hadn't just closed it. I had locked it. I had driven the 3-inch steel pin into its socket with my own hands the first night. It was an internal-only mechanism. It was impossible to open from the outside. But it was moving. I was frozen, my back pressed against the cold glass of the window. The blue, stasis, Light pinned me like a butterfly, flooding the cabin with an arctic, clinical glow. Outside, the world was black. Inside, it was a sterile, blue-white operating theater. Shink. Clack. The bolt handle settled into the unlocked position. Total silence. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. My entire universe was reduced to that 3 by 3 foot square of metal in the floor. It's empty, I told myself. The ladder is 100 feet long. It's just the system. It's just the protocol. It's resetting itself. But my lie was hollow. The greeting protocol was for me. The stasis protocol was for me. This was for me. Then, from the pillar below, it started. Clanged out a sound. Metal on metal. Coming from inside the ladder tube. My heart hammered against my ribs. A trapped bird. I scrambled backward, grabbing the heaviest thing I could find, the fire extinguisher. It felt useless, a can of spray paint against an ocean liner. Clang. Closer. Slower. A rhythmic, deliberate ascent. Clang. This wasn't a person. A person in a hurry would be scrambling. A person trying to be quiet would be stealthy. This was methodical. This was indifferent. It wasn't worried about me. It wasn't worried about falling. Clang. It was halfway up the 100-foot tube. The console. I had to look at the console. It was the only thing that gave me answers. I lunged for the desk, keeping my eyes on the trapdoor. The screen was no longer on the silo. It had a new window open. Contract Thomas R. Failed. Duration 4 days. Assets reclaimed. Penalty full. Disposition pending. The word pending was blinking. Clang. It was just below the floor now. 10 feet. No, I whimpered, the word pathetic and small. A new line of text appeared. Disposition approved. Initiating reclamation. The blinking stopped. The trapdoor groaned as the steel hinges took weight from below. It wasn't being pushed open. It was being pulled open, slowly, from underneath. It rose an inch. Then 2. A gap of pure, pillar black darkness opened in the floor. The stasis. Light outside intensified, the blue beam brightening, focusing entirely on the opening. The trapdoor swung fully open with a heavy, final thud, resting flat against the cabin floor. The thing climbing the ladder was not Thomas R. It was one of the suits. A heavy, gray, faceless gravity suit, identical to the ones I'd seen on the silo. It was climbing the ladder, one handed. In its other hand, it was carrying something. A heavy, black, vinyl body bag. The kind coroners use. It was zipped shut. The figure reached the top of the ladder. Its heavy, steel-plated boot, identical to the ones Dale wore, planted itself on the cabin floor. It stepped out of the hole, into the blue light. The black, reflective helmet turned, scanning the cabin. It saw me, cowering by the console. It registered me. And then it dismissed me. I was not its protocol. It moved to the center of the room. It unzipped the body bag with a single, practiced pull. The bag was empty. It was for me. No. I looked at the console again, my mind screaming. Contract Thomas R. Disposition approved. This wasn't for me. This was the disposition. The figure in the suit reached into the cabin, not out. It grabbed my small, aluminum frame camping chair. Crunch. Its glove, which I'd thought was flexible material, compressed. The aluminum tubes buckled and tore. It wasn't a suit. It was a machine. It threw the mangled chair into the empty bag. Then it went for my cot. It ripped the thin mattress in half, stuffing the foam and fabric inside. It tore the metal frame from its bolts with a shriek of tortured steel. It was reclaiming the assets. My boots. My food. My jacket. The shatterproof coffee mugs. One by one, it was reclaiming every non-essential, company-issued item. It was cleaning. This was the penalty. This was the disposition. This is what happens when you walk off. They don't just stop the pay. They erase you. They reclaim the gear. And the previous lookout Thomas R. He wasn't in the bag. He was the bag. He was the asset they had reclaimed 4 days ago. The creature, the attendant, finished. The bag was now full, bulging with my supplies. It zipped it shut. It stood in the center of the room. The cabin was now sterile. Empty except for the console, the cot frame, and me. The faceless black helmet turned. It looked at me. It stood there, unmoving, for a full 10 seconds. I could see my own terrified, blue-lit face reflected in its mask. Then, the console updated. Contract. Alex M. Active. Duration 4 days. Status observing. Compliant. Assets secure. Essentials only. Phase 2 complete. Awaiting event 09B. The attendant was satisfied. I was compliant. I was a good observer. It slung the heavy bag over its shoulder. It walked back to the hold. It stepped onto the ladder. But before it descended, it stopped. It reached up, its gloved hand emerging from the darkness. It placed something on the floor, just inside the lip of the trapdoor. Then it was gone. The trapdoor swung shut with a clang. The bolt, my internal bolt, slid back into place. Shink. Clack. The blue, stasis, light outside, went out. The Aerie was plunged into absolute, terrifying darkness, broken only by the dim, green glow of the console. I was alone. I was alive. I was compliant. I waited until my heart stopped trying to escape my chest. Then, slowly, I crawled toward the trapdoor. My fingers, shaking, found what the attendant had left. It was a small, vacuum-sealed, foil pouch. Military grade. I fumbled it open. It wasn't food. It wasn't a tool. It was a single, heavy, steel-plated boot. A message. Keep yourself heavier, or we'll reclaim you too. The Aerie was a sterile vacuum. The only sounds were the ones I made, the rasp of my own breathing, the frantic, wet sound of my heart. The cold was immediate. The attendant hadn't just taken my gear. It had taken the insulation, the blankets, the small creature comforts that made this glass box a shelter. Now it was just a cage. I stayed on the floor for what felt like an hour, staring at the spot where the attendant had been. My mind was a loop of 3 facts. I was alive. The system had approved of me. The system was now awaiting event 09B. The darkness began to fade, replaced by the thin, gray light of pre-dawn. The sunrise, which had been a breathtaking perk of the job, now just illuminated my prison. The 360-degree glass revealed nothing but empty, mocking sky. I was cold, and I was hungry. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The attendant had taken all my food. Not just the snacks. The freeze-dried meals, the coffee, the water purification tablets. Everything. How was I supposed to survive for 6 weeks? The answer was immediate. I wasn't. The contract wasn't for 6 weeks. The contract was for as long as I remained compliant and observing, one event at a time. The 6-week pay was a lie to lure a desperate person. Thomas R. had lasted 4 days. I had just passed day 4. My eyes fell on the thing the attendant had left me. The boot. I crawled to it. It wasn't one of Dale's logger boots. It was theirs. The material was the same smooth, jointed gray as the attendant's suit. The sole was a 2-inch thick plate of the same polished, obsidian-like steel as the silo. I picked it up. It should have weighed 15, maybe 20 pounds. It felt like it was bolted to the floor. I had to use both hands, straining, to lift it. It had to be over 100 pounds. It was impossibly heavy. It wasn't a boot. It was an anchor. Keep yourself heavier. This was my inheritance. This was the reward for compliance. One anchor, in a place where gravity was a rumor. I went to the console. I had to know. My fingers were stiff with cold. I navigated to the assets log. It had updated. Contract. Alex M. Active. Duration 4 days. Assets secure. Essentials only. Asterisk rations 6 weeks reclaimed. Asterisk cot/bedding reclaimed. Asterisk personal gear reclaimed. Asterisk harness weighted reclaimed. Asterisk essentials 01 console active. Asterisk essentials 02 gravity anchor 1 PROV. Provided. I was alone, freezing, starving, with a 100-pound boot, on a glass platform 100 feet in the air, waiting for something called Event 09B. The console chimed. A soft, single beep. A new log had appeared. Event 09B, atmospheric, detected. Estimated arrival, 48 minutes. Atmospheric. Dales lie. High winds. My eyes darted to the glass walls. The sky was clear. Not a cloud. No. Wind. The console chimed again. A new window popped up. It wasn't a log. It was a video feed. CM_internal_ladder_tub. My stomach clenched. It was a grainy, infrared view down the 100-foot pillar. I was staring into the blackness from which the attendant had come. At first, there was nothing. Just the rungs of the ladder, descending into shadow. Then I heard it. It wasn't a sound from outside. It was a low, rising whistle, coming from the console's speakers. It was the audio from the camera feed. It was the sound of wind. But it wasn't outside. It was inside. It was coming from the bottom of my tower. I looked at the feed. A speck of something, a piece of dust, or debris, shot past the camera, moving up. The silo had vented. The attendant had climbed the ladder. The pillar was an open-ended tube, a 100-foot-tall smokestack, connected to the dark, pressurized systems deep within the mountain. And Event 09B wasn't a storm outside the tower. It was a pressure release up it. The console updated, the text flashing red. Warning, pressure event imminent. Secure local anchor. Secure trapdoor. I looked at the trapdoor. The bolt was secure. I was the local anchor. The whistle became a shriek. The trapdoor in the floor, the 3-by-3-foot square of solid steel, vibrated. The pressure was building. It wasn't trying to get in. It was using the Aerie as an exhaust port. The steel-plated boot was my only weight. The harness was gone. The harness was for low gravity. This was for high pressure. The trapdoor bulged upwards. The heavy steel pin on the bolt screamed as it took the force. Warning, internal pressure exceeding latch tolerance. 30 seconds. It was going to blow. Latch integrity, 10%. The console's warning was no longer a warning, it was a death knell. The entire Aerie was thrumming, a tuning fork struck by a giant. The trapdoor was visibly bowing upwards in the center, a 3-by-3-foot square of steel buckling against a force that had snapped solid rock from the mountainside. The bolt wasn't just vibrating. It was screaming a high-pitched metallic shriek, white-hot dust shearing from the contact points. Secure trapdoor. Secure local anchor. My mind was white noise. How? I couldn't hold it. I couldn't stand on it. The pressure would vaporize me or launch me through the glass ceiling. My eyes fell on the boot. The 100-pound anchor.it was the only thing in the room with enough mass. Latch integrity. 2%. Latch failure imminent. I didn't think. I reacted. I grabbed the anchor boot, my muscles screaming in protest. It wasn't 100 pounds of dead weight. It was 100 pounds of purpose. I didn't lift it. I dragged it, scraping a 2-inch wide groove in the cabin floor. The bolt snapped. A gunshot crack, followed by the shriek of the pin exploding from its socket. The trapdoor, freed, began to lift. With a final, desperate roar, I heaved the anchor boot off the floor and slammed it down onto the center of the buckling steel door. It didn't just thud. It clanged. A deep, resonate magnetic bond. The boot wasn't just heavy. It was a lock. The obsidian steel sole wasn't steel. It was a magnet so powerful it seized the trapdoor, yanking it back down. The door held. It held, but it wasn't a seal. The pressure from below, now denied its primary exit, found a new one. With a sound like a million snakes hissing, a jet of white-hot, superheated steam erupted from the edges of the trapdoor. The Aerie, which had been freezing seconds before, became an oven. Event 09B, active. Aerie temp, 45 degrees C. The glass walls instantly fogged, blinding me. The sound was a deafening, constant roar. The cabin filled with the smell of hot metal and sulfur. I scrambled away from the door, my skin already stinging. The steam wasn't just hot, it was corrosive. It was peeling the paint from the console desk. I huddled against the far wall, the glass of the window now painfully hot against my back. Aerie temp, 55 degrees C. I was cooking. The air was too hot to breathe. I was inhaling steam, searing my lungs. I pulled my thin shirt over my mouth, but it was useless. Aerie temp, 62 degrees Celsius. Trapdoor seal, compromised. Anchor, holding. Magnetic lock, 98%. The console itself was starting to flicker, the heat affecting the screen. I was going to pass out. I was going to die, boiled alive in a glass jar. I looked at the anchor boot, visible through the swirling steam. It was glowing, a dull cherry red, but it was holding. The magnetic lock was the only thing between me and a geyser of plasma. I closed my eyes. It was over. I couldn't. The sound stopped. It didn't fade. It cut off. Like a vacuum. The sudden silence was as violent as the noise. I slumped to the floor, gasping, my lungs burning. The Aerie was a sauna. The walls were dripping. The trapdoor was smoking, the boot at its center still sizzling. My console, miraculously, was still on. Event 09B, concluded. Duration, 3 minutes and 58 seconds. Aerie temp, 68 degrees Celsius. Vents opening. Contract, Alex M. Status, survived. I heard a click and a mechanical whir. Small vents, hidden in the ceiling, had opened. Cool, fresh, outside air began to pour and I lay on the floor, panting, for a full 10 minutes, letting the blessedly cold mountain air wash over me. I was alive. I had survived. I had used the tool correctly. A new, soft chime from the console. Contract, Alex M. Active. Status proven. Phase 2 complete. Initiating Phase 3. Awaiting Event 09C. Proven. I wasn't just compliant. I was proven. I had passed their test. They had given me a problem, Event 09B, and a tool, the anchor. And I had solved it. A new icon flickered to life on the screen. A new camera feed. It wasn't the silo. It wasn't the ladder. It was labeled CM_Valley_Ridge_East. I crawled to the desk. My hands, red and blistered, clicked the icon. The screen resolved. It was a high-powered, zoomed-in shot of the ridge line, miles across the valley. It was dark, the sun not yet up. At first, I saw nothing. Just pine trees and rock, then, a light. It wasn't a star. It wasn't a plane. It was a single, blue-white pinpoint. The exact same color as the stasis, light from the silo, and it was moving. It was moving down the ridge, through the trees, in a slow, zigzagging pattern. It was hunting. The console updated. Event 09C, biological, detected. Estimated arrival, 2 hours 14 minutes. My skin was a road map of red, blistering burns from the steam. Every time I moved, it felt like my clothes were being peeled from a fresh wound. The cold air pouring from the vents was both a relief and an agony. And now, this. Event 09C, biological, detected. Estimated arrival, 2h14m. I was watching the camera feed, transfixed. The blue light. It was the same cold, sterile blue as the stasis field, the same blue as the attendant's tools. It wasn't a flashlight. It didn't waver. It was a constant, pinpoint source of light, moving with a terrifying, liquid grace. It wasn't climbing the ridge. It was flowing over it. Biological. The word felt wrong. Everything I'd seen so far, the suits, the silo, the attendants, was sterile, mechanical, procedural. Biological implied messy. It implied hunger. It implied life. I stumbled back to the console, my burned hands fumbling with the trackpad. I had to know what Event 09C was. I clicked out of the camera, into the main event log. The entry for 09C was there. But next to it, the event type column had a new, terrifying descriptor. Event 09C, biological, rogue. Rogue. This wasn't a test. This wasn't a phase. This was a containment breach. This thing, this blue light, wasn't part of the procedure. It was a consequence of it. The silo, the purge, the gravity event, it had let something out. I looked at the camera feed again. The light was moving faster. The zigzag, hunting, pattern was gone. It was now moving in a dead straight line. It knew where I was. The Aerie, this glass tower, wasn't a lookout post. It was a lighthouse. It was the brightest, warmest, most active thing in this entire dead valley. I was a bug in a jar, and this thing was coming for the light. My eyes scanned the console. The ETA was ticking down. Estimated arrival, 1h59m. It had just crossed 5 miles of mountain terrain in 15 minutes. I looked at my asset list. Console 1. Anchor 1. How do I fight a rogue biological entity with a 100-pound boot? The console chimed. A new window, overlaying the camera feed. It wasn't a log. It was an instruction. Rogue entity detected. Observer at risk. Initiate Stillwater Protocol? Y/N. Stillwater. The name of the forest. Be still. What did that mean? What protocol? A Y and N button flashed on the screen. My hand hovered. What was the test here? Was this the test? To follow the new instruction? Estimated arrival, 1h32m. It was accelerating. I didn't have a choice. I didn't have any choice. I was proven, which just meant I was a better trained dog. My blistered finger jammed the Y. The screen changed instantly. Stillwater Protocol, acknowledged. Observer, Alex M. Must initiate manual shutdown. This tower is a beacon. Observer must go dark. A new icon appeared. A single, large, red button on the screen labeled, Aerie Systems, Online. Manual shutdown. It wanted me to turn everything off. The console. The cameras. The vents. The console was my only connection, my only source of information. The vents were my only source of air. This was the test. Not to fight it. Not to solve it. But to hide. To become so still, so dark, so cold, that the thing would pass me by. I looked at the camera feed one last time. The blue light was no longer on the ridge. It was in the valley. It was at the base of my mountain. It wasn't a light. It was a swarm. A churning, roiling cloud of tiny, blue-white sparks, moving as one. Like insects. Like static. Estimated arrival. 4 minutes. I screamed, a dry, hot sound. I didn't just tap the button. I smashed it with the heel of my good hand. Aerie systems, offline. Protocol active. Good luck, observer. The console screen died. The green glow, my only light for 3 days, vanished. The low, electric hum of the tower died. The hiss of the life-saving air from the vents died. The Aerie was plunged into absolute, crushing, tomb-like darkness. And a silence so profound it hurt. I was blind. I was deaf. I was alone in a cold, black, glass box, 100 feet in the air. I backed away from the dead console, my hands outstretched, until I hit the cold glass wall. I waited. 1 minute. 2. Nothing. Maybe it worked, I thought, the hope a painful, physical ache. Maybe it's passing by. And then I saw it. It wasn't a reflection. It wasn't on a screen. It was outside. A faint, blue-white glow, illuminating the pine trees 100 feet below me. The swarm. It was here, and it was climbing. I watched, my mouth open in a silent scream, as a million points of tiny, electric blue light began to crawl up the outside of my 100-foot concrete pillar, like ants on a tree. They weren't looking for a beacon. They were hungry. And they had just found the cage. The silence was a physical weight. It pressed on my eardrums, amplifying the sound of my own blood pulsing, the wet crackle of my blistered skin as I shifted. The Aerie was a black void, and I was the only thing in it. Then, the silence broke. It was not a loud sound. It was a dry sound. It was the sound of a million autumn leaves skittering across pavement. The sound of fine sand being poured on glass. The sound of a radio tuned to a dead channel. It was the sound of the swarm. It was on the glass. My head snapped up. I was in the center of the room, on my knees, unable to move. The first spark appeared. A single, pinprick of electric blue light at the bottom edge of the glass. Then another. And another. It wasn't a climb. It was an inundation. Within seconds, the entire 360-degree glass enclosure was covered. A roiling, churning, living wall of blue-white static. The darkness was gone. The Aerie was lit from the outside by a cold, flickering, epileptic blue. I was on a stage, illuminated from all sides. I could see every detail of my prison, the scorched patch on the floor, the empty bolt holes of my cot, the useless, 100-pound anchor boot, and the swarm could see me. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Stillwater protocol. Be still. The sound was everywhere now. A constant, high-pitched crackle, like a wildfire made of tiny sparks. They moved over the glass, testing it. They weren't just on it, they were in it. I could see tiny, thread-like tendrils of blue electricity inside the lamination of the supposedly shatterproof glass, as if they were trying to find a molecular path. They were hungry. The tower was cold, the systems were dead. There was no electricity. There was no heat, except for the 98.6 degrees of me. I was the only, live, thing for 100 miles. I was the beacon. My heart. Thump thump. Thump dash thump. In the total silence of the Aerie, it was a drumbeat. It was a dinner bell. The swarm reacted. The chaotic, roiling motion on the glass stopped. The millions of sparks, which had been moving like a fluid, suddenly focused. Directly in front of me, the cloud of static congealed. The sparks coalesced, forming a single, dense, blindingly bright patch of blue, 5 feet tall and 3 feet wide. The shape of AMAN.IT was an afterimage, a void in the static. No. It was the focus of the static. It was looking at me. It knew exactly where I was. The sound changed. The generalized crackle became a targeted, insistent buzz. Like a fly trapped in a jar. A fly that could melt steel. Be still. Be still. Don't breathe. Don't exist. I held my breath until my lungs burned worse than my skin. I tried to slow my own heart. I was a statue of terrified meat. The blue, man-shaped patch of light pressed against the glass. Tick. A sound. Not the swarm. A new sound. It was tiny. Metallic. Tick. It was coming from above me. I forced my eyes, slowly, to look up, the ceiling. The metal, slatted vents. The ones the system had used to save me from the steam. They were closed. Dark. Tick. Tink. Behind the closed metal slats of the vent directly over my head, a single, blue spark flickered. The SSSHHH sound wasn't just outside. It was inside. It wasn't a static-filled crackle. It was the sound of something dry and small, crawling inside the metal ductwork. The Stillwater Protocol hadn't just shut off the tower. It had shut off the fans. The fans that had been pushing air out. The swarm wasn't just outside trying to get in. It was already in the system. And I had just turned off the only thing that was keeping it at bay. Tink. Tink. BZZZZT. A single, electric blue spark shot out between the metal slats of the vent. It hung in the air, a tiny, malevolent star, and then it fell. The spark didn't fall. It flew. It corrected its trajectory mid-air, a tiny, sentient missile, and shot toward the warmest thing in the room, me. I flinched, a convulsive, full-body spasm that slammed my head against the glass wall. The spark struck my arm, my blistered, burned skin. It wasn't a burn. It wasn't a sting. It was void. A pinprick of absolute, agonizing cold, like a needle of dry ice, followed by the immediate, biological wrongness of my own nerves short-circuiting. My entire arm went numb, a dead weight. I screamed. The Stillwater Protocol was broken. The instant my scream left my throat, the swarm outside replied. The man-shape on the glass exploded. The low crackle became a single, solid, deafening shrik, the sound of 1,000 power drills on solid metal. The Aerie, the entire 100-foot pillar, began to vibrate. The glass was no longer just a window. It was a drumhead, and they were beating it to death. Bzzzzzzzzzt. Tink. Tink. The vent above me, the one I had foolishly ignored, opened like a wound. It was no longer a drizzle. A stream of blue-white static poured into the cabin, a waterfall of hungry light. It hit the floor and raced toward me, a shimmering, electric blue carpet. My Stillwater had become a still tomb. I scrambled, my numb arm dragging uselessly. The swarm outside wanted in. The swarm inside was here. I was trapped between a hammer and an anvil. I had to move. I had to act. I looked at the console. It was dead. The "Good luck, observer" message was a final, mocking epitaph. No. I turned it off. Maybe I could turn it back on. The swarm on the floor was 2 feet away. The Anchor.it was the only tool. I grabbed the 100-pound boot with my good hand. It was an anchor. It was a lock. It was metal.it was the stupidest, most desperate idea of my life. I didn't try to lift it. I dragged it, my one good arm straining, my muscles tearing. I pulled it directly under the vent, the metal scraping a groove in the floor. The waterfall of sparks was now splashing onto the boot, and the boot was conducting it. The obsidian steel, the same material as the silo, didn't just get hot. It channeled the energy. It lit up, the 100-pound mass becoming a solid, electric blue beacon. But it wasn't hurting the swarm. It was feeding it. The swarm from the vent, seeing a new, more efficient source, ignored me and focused entirely on the boot. The boot was now a seething, crackling mass of blue energy. The swarm on the floor stopped advancing on me. I had bought myself a second. Cracked out a sound that wasn't the swarm. It was the Aerie. I looked at the window. A hairline fracture, a spiderweb of shattered glass, had appeared at the top of the pane where the man-shape had been. They were winning. The console. It had to be the console. I lunged for the dead desk. The swarm outside roared at my sudden movement. The swarm inside, still focused on the boot, was a blinding pillar of light, connecting the vent to the floor. I hammered the dead screen. Nothing. Come on! I screamed, my voice a raw rasp. Manual override! Where is it? I wasn't an observer. I was bait. And the bait was about to be taken. My frantic hands swept the underside of the desk. I felt, not a button. A lever. A thick, old-fashioned, rubber-handled breaker switch that my fingers had never brushed before. It was hidden, a physical fail-safe. Warning, manual protocol override. Lethal system charge imminent. I didn't read the braille-like label. I felt it. The swarm inside had gorged on the boot. It was now overflowing. The pillar of light was spreading, arcing from the boot to the metal legs of the console. Sparks began to leap toward me. The glass wall cracked again. This time, a piece of it, the size of my hand, fell from the ceiling, shattering on the floor. I grabbed the lever with my good hand, and pulled. The next 0.8 seconds were the longest of my life. First, the sound. Not a roar. A deep, resonant thwomp. The entire tower became a colossal electromagnet. Second, the light. The anchor boot, which had been a conduit, instantly became a capacitor. The 100-pound mass flashed, a white-hot detonation of stored energy. Third, the force. The purge wasn't fans. It was gravity. The anchor boot's magnetic lock reversed. It became a repulsor. A shockwave of pure kinetic force exploded from the boot upwards. The waterfall of sparks didn't just get sucked back into the vent. It was shot. It was fired like a billion tiny bullets back up the ductwork. I heard them pinging and screaming as they were scoured from the tower's systems. Simultaneously, the console blazed to life. The lights snapped on, turning the Aerie into a star, and the swarm outside. The instant the purge wave hit, the shrieking stopped. The vibrating stopped. The blue, living static, which had been a solid wall of malevolent energy, recoiled. It didn't just retreat. It fled, streaming away from the tower glass, a million comets in reverse. It poured down the pillar and flowed back into the valley, a river of blue light disappearing into the dark. Silenced. I was on the floor, gasping, my left arm a useless slab of cold meat, my right hand smoking from the raw electricity of the lever. I was alive. I had won. The console chimed, serene. Stillwater protocol failed. Observer Al. XM. Compromised. Biological contact. Event 09C. Rogue, repelled, compromised. My arm. The cold was spreading, but I didn't have time to process it. A new alert, the most terrifying one yet, flashed on the screen. Alert, reclamation protocol initiated. Contract, Alex M. Reason, biological contamination. ETA, 60 seconds. Disposition, liquidation. The words burned hotter than the steam. Disposition, Liquidation. I wasn't an observer. I wasn't an asset. I was a spill. And they were initiating a protocol to clean me up. ETA, 50 seconds. The console, my only friend, my only tormentor, was now a countdown clock. A new sound. A deep, mechanical thud from far below. It was the silo, re-engaging. Liquidation protocol, thermal. Event 09B rerouted. My blood turned to ice, a cold that had nothing to do with my compromised arm. Event 09B. The steam. The superheated, corrosive, paint-peeling steam. They weren't just going to vent it around the trapdoor. They were going to route it directly into the Aerie. They were going to pressure cook me, scour the contamination, and leave a sterile, empty can. ETA 40 seconds, the trapdoor. The only way out. I scrambled to it, my good hand fumbling with the latch. The anchor boot was still on top of it, sizzling, but no longer glowing. I put my hand on it. It was just heavy. The purge had discharged it. I couldn't move the boot and open the door. Not in 30 seconds. I looked at my left arm. The compromised one. The blue, nerveless cold had spread to my shoulder. It was a piece of alien meat, hanging from my body. I couldn't even feel it. Bzzt. A spark. The same cold blue spark. It didn't come from the vent. It came from my fingertips, the spark from the swarm. It hadn't just hit me. It had joined me. ETA, 30 seconds. A roar from below. The ignition. The sound of 1,000 blast furnaces, rushing up the 100-foot pillar. The trapdoor was already getting hot. No, I whispered. I didn't have 30 seconds. I had 5. I looked at the window. The one the swarm had cracked. The attendants. They walked up the cliff. The boot. The gravity anchor. It wasn't a choice. It was the only move left. I grabbed the anchor boot. But I didn't use my good arm. I used the dead one. I reached for it, my mind screaming at the useless limb. And the compromised arm obeyed. It wasn't my muscle. It was its energy. The arm, numb and dead, clamped onto the 100-pound boot with a strength that wasn't human. It lifted it, effortlessly. ETA, 15 seconds. The Aerie was an oven. The trapdoor was beginning to glow a dull red. I shoved my one good foot into the boot. It was heavy, a ridiculous, impossible weight. I turned to the shattered window. The glass was spiderwebbed, broken, but still holding. ETA, 10 seconds. I didn't kick it. I leaned. On my body, my one good arm, my one good foot, they were nothing. But the 100-pound boot, and the thing my left arm had become, they were purpose. The glass exploded outwards in a shower. ETA, 5 seconds. I was standing on the ledge. 100 feet of open, night air. Below me, the forest. Above me, the stars. Behind me, held. ETA, 4. The wind was a scream. ETA, 3. I looked down at the sheer, vertical face of the concrete pillar. ETA, 2. Keep yourself heavier. ETA, 1. I stepped off the ledge. There was no fall. The 100-pound clang of the boot's magnetic sole locking onto the vertical concrete was the last sound I heard before the world erupted. Liquidation. Active. A pillar of white-hot, sulfurous flame exploded from the Aerie behind me. It wasn't a jet, it was a detonation. The 360-degree glass vaporized. The Aerie became a star, a furnace, a blazing torch that lit the entire valley, the sound a physical wave that slammed into my back. But I was no longer there. I was 20 feet down. I was walking. 1 foot on the concrete. One hand, my left hand, the blue sparking, compromised, strong hand, gripping the pillar's side, its tendrils of cold energy digging into the concrete like a crampon. Step. The boot clangs onto the concrete. Step. My new hand grips. I didn't fall. I descended. I was a spider. I was one of them. I reached the bottom, my one boot hitting the granite foundation. The area above me was a funeral pyre, a roaring inferno, the liquidation complete. The console was gone. The tower was silent, save for the fire. The system, for a moment, was blind. I stood in the darkness, at the base of the tower. I was alive. I was freezing cold. And I was something else. My contract was broken. My disposition was liquidation. I was a rogue element. I looked at the silo. The 30-foot steel disc was flush, silent, and dark. I looked at the path to Acre's drop. And then I looked at the dark, silent wilderness. The place the blue swarm had fled. The Aerie had been a cage. The valley was a prison, and I was pending. I turned away from the burning tower. The heavy, 100-pound boot made a single, resonant clang on the granite rock. And then another. I began to walk.